This guide for the season of Risk and Run will cover the ninjas and the weapons. We're only focusing on SSR here, so we won't be going to any of the SSR weapons or ninjas, just covering the SSR. And the main thing that we're trying to keep in mind here is more competitive gameplay. The other thing I won't be doing is I'm not showing video footage in this video. I'm really covering more just an analysis of how the ninjas kind of stack up against each other, and then give some personal feedback on how I think the weapons are and what their utility can be when you're using them in arena. You can take a moment and pause the video if you want to look at what I did with these tables here. So the first view here, you're going to see kind of what the status is of each of those areas. So you'll see for jump, for example, it'll indicate if it's triple jump, float, or in the case of Itsuru and Morven, you'll see triple and float. And then they get a score that's associated with that. So you'll start off by seeing this. All of this will kind of give you a directional sense of what I'm thinking, and then there's a score based from lowest usefulness to highest usefulness in arena, and then the score is all the way off to the right. So we start off here, and then we go to a view like this one where I show you what the actual scores are. I'm going to do this for all the ninjas. Here I decided to do a tier ranking, and it was based on the scores that I came up with the tables. The tables were intended to be a little bit less subjective, so I tried to use that as a way to kind of score things and be a little less biased in the way that I evaluated things. There's always some bias when you do these things, so you can make the data work however you want, but this was the way that it panned out for me. So I have Morven at the top, and S tier is basically anything that scored above 12. Between 11 and 12, that's going to be A tier, so Breaking Thunder Riki, Yoru, and Itsuru end up landing there. For B tier, that's going to be anything that gets you a 9 or a 10. And then for 7 and 8, that's going to be C tier. So you can see that you're starting off ninjas, so Riki, Soga, Kuro, and Rin. They're going to be the ones that start you at that C tier. Your evolved ninjas are going to get you to B tier, with the exception of Breaking Thunder Riki. He bumps up a little bit higher, just based on his ease of use. That bumps him up a little higher. This doesn't mean that your teams should be set up based on this. You might not want to just use S and A tier ninjas based on this list. I, for example, like to use Mai in my team setup, so her team skill is really useful, and even if I'm not relating to her, she ends up being very helpful in the way that I play. So I'll lead with Morven, for example, and then Mai's team skill is something that I can use, and I basically get 2 additional attacks on top of my weapon and cards. Shin Jade Edge bow is pretty rough. Most people don't like to use it. The attack spreads out pretty wide, and it's hard to do good damage with it. You have to pretty much be in the boss's face to do damage, so if they're not coming up to you, you need something like the Wind Dash card or Vermilion Bird to get close to the boss so that you can fire it and deal extra damage. Otherwise, it's really just more of a defensive weapon, and you're using it to block projectiles more than do damage. Blizzard Bringer is more of a defensive weapon, so if you have obstacles that you'd like to break, you could use it for that. Not great for dealing damage. This weapon's probably not best for arena. More than likely you'll see some good use out of it if you level it up and fully limit break it if you're in race, but outside of that, it's probably not as useful. Sky Crystal Kunai is a solid weapon. It allows for you to get 2 stacks of weapon attacks to be stored, so you can save it and do a lot of damage. So things like disarm don't really hurt you as much as they do for other weapons. The nice thing about this weapon too is that it's good for clearing out all obstacles on the screen if they're destroyable, and there are some projectiles that it can break that other weapons often can't. Snow Benison Bell is a really nice weapon that also freezes your enemy. When it's fully limit breaked, it'll actually shoot 2 ice crystals that'll freeze the enemy. Does better for Ren and Snowdance Ren because it gives a defensive shield from the front that will block all projectiles while the attack's in play. It doesn't do as good of a job for other ninjas, but it's still pretty useful. Ocean Oracle is a decent weapon in general for defense, better than Blizzard Bringer in my opinion. Does better damage compared to Blizzard Bringer for bosses. Also, projectiles don't break or stop the same way that it does with Blizzard Bringer, so you're getting this kind of arced pattern, which gives more screen coverage. I would be careful with this one. It's okay, but it only attacks enemies in front of you, so if the enemy gets behind you, it's not necessarily as useful. So it has a little bit of a weak spot there. I would generally recommend this more for race than I would for arena. Aqua Dragon Blade is a solid sword, does best in the hands of Ren or Snowdance Ren, does a little bit of extra damage to dragons, also gives a 15% damage boost once you get it fully limit break. I would just say keep in mind that this one has kind of linear attacks that sort of track, so you want to be careful with that. If you do upgrade it enough, you can break some unbreakable projectiles with the bigger Aqua Dragon that shoots out from the sword, so this one's pretty useful. Dragon's Beard Brush is currently the strongest water weapon available, and if you limit break it to at least limit break 3, it gives you an additional 300 attack when you use the weapon for all water weapons. So the water weapon damage also stacks. So if you use Whetstone and use it again, or if you use Cost of Power or something like that, that'll help you out in dealing extra damage when you're fighting bosses. Fire Blessed Vermilion Bird is a pretty interesting weapon. It basically gives you a dash attack, so while you're navigating the map, it can help you get to the boss faster. Also, when you're fighting bosses, you can use it in conjunction with other attacks to kind of stack the damage on top of the boss and deal extra damage. Dragon's Feast is a weapon that often gets a lot of hate for being a weaker weapon. There are 2 things that I would say to keep in mind when you get this and consider to keep. One, it can track the enemy, so whether they go off screen or behind you, it can still track and attack them. The other thing that helps out is when you level it up, it'll drop meat onto the stage and when it hits an enemy, and that meat can be used to both recover your health and boost your ninjutsu gauge. So it's more useful than it might sound. I personally like it in a secondary weapon slot when I'm trying to work through things, and I find it's very helpful. Fire Bancho is a good weapon for clearing obstacles when you're navigating through a stage, as well as for attacking the boss and destroying the projectiles that it might shoot out. The other thing that you want to keep in mind with this is if the boss has a tendency to move close and away from you while it's close to you and getting ready to move away, a good time to use the Fire Bancho is when it starts to move back so that it can continue to do damage as it's moving. Divine Flame Staff is decently powerful, but can be a little tricky to use. It'll track either left or right depending on which position the boss is in. If there's no boss, then it'll automatically shoot forward. You do need to adjust your height to make sure that you're going to hit the boss though. So if the boss is in the air, then you need to jump. If it's below the rope, then you'll need to flip down. Dragon's Breath is a really nice and powerful weapon that's good for doing continuous damage and clearing projectiles if there's a lot of them coming your way. So strongly recommend if you get this one, building it up and using it. it pairs well with other weapons to help you deal damage as well. Woven Flame is a nice strong sword, gives a similar boost to Dragon's Beard Brush where it gives plus 300 weapon attack to fire weapons if you're at limit break 3 or higher. And it also has a little bit of tracking on it, so the first slash you have to aim it, second and third, those ones will track, and then if you have it leveled up you'll even get a fourth slash, and that one you also have to aim. Really strong, works really quick, and it pairs well with other weapons. I like using this one as my primary and then having Dragon's Breath as my second weapon. Flute of Hymn often gets a lot of hate for being weak, but what it lacks in power, it makes up for in defensive ability. So I'd say, if you're having trouble staying alive, or if you want an option to help protect against projectiles or trap cards, you can use this as a way to get around that. It can still be used as a competitive weapon. If you're worried about it being in your primary slot, you can always put it in your secondary slot, so you have that as a plan B. Kamaitachi Fan is very similar to Fire Bancho in clearing projectiles, also used the same way for attacking the boss. So if the boss is in front of you and moving back, then you can use it as a way to continue to do damage as it's moving from left to right. The other thing that I would say about this is it has a little bit more screen coverage, so from the rope up, or if you flip down the rope, down on the rope, it'll cover a little bit below the rope and it'll cover over the rope as well. So it's a nice weapon to help protect against projectiles. Feather of Wind is like Dragon Beard Brush and Woven Flame, really strong. It is a little harder to aim than those two weapons. You do have to be in a horizontal line with the boss. If you're using Itsuru, you'll get a little bit more coverage area and better protection. The weapon stacks that happen with it are also solid, so if you have two of them or if you have a second wind weapon, this weapon works really well. Wind Blessed Azure Dragon is a tricky bow to use. If you max out its limit break, it does have additional defensive properties, so I like to use it. It can break projectiles. It can also deal extra damage while it's charging up and gearing up to attack the boss. So I personally recommend having it as a backup weapon. I think this one pairs nicely either as a replacement or as a second weapon with the Feather of Wind. Ghost Tear Muramasa is a nice strong weapon, and as you limit break it and level it up, it just gets stronger as you go, so you feel the damage really scale as you continue to improve it. This is a good alternative if you don't have Feather of Wind if you're trying to stay competitive. Lightning Blessed Kirin is a decently strong bow with really strong tracking abilities, so I like to use this one. It's a great starter weapon, continues to be useful even in stronger or higher levels of gameplay. I really like it. Dawn of Lightning is a really nice weapon that is especially powerful in the hands of Starlit Flash Pepper. This one's strong versus Mecha. You get a little bit of a damage boost, 15% if you limit break it enough. So good to have in your arsenal, especially if you're a Lightning main. Lightning Swirl Blade is an interesting weapon because you can get both defensive and offensive use out of it depending on how you choose to use it. So if you use, say, Vermilion Bird or Wind Dash card while using this sword, you can push the swirling lightning spheres into the boss and deal extra damage. The other thing that you can do with this weapon is that, if there's a lot of projectiles floating around the screen that can be destroyed, you can use this as a way to break them. And then the orbs do track towards the boss once you've limit broken it enough, so you can not have to worry about the boss being missed as long as they're not moving around too much. If they teleport, it will still miss, but it's still a strong weapon. Iphone XXX is a good defensive weapon that also has decent offensive utility. Good for building up ninjutsu and generally good for protecting against traps and projectiles. Lightning Burst Sword is a good sword for clearing obstacles and dealing damage to bosses. Generally best in the hands of Riki or Breaking Thunder Riki, but can work on any Lightning Ninja. Hopefully this helped out a bit, got you thinking about the ninjas and the weapons a little bit differently than you might have been before. I know that some of the ideas I have around this might be a little different from what you might be hearing from others that are playing the game. Come up with your own ideas, come up with your own strategies. This is just to help give a gauge or a guide to help you get to where you want to be. So thanks for checking this out. If this helped out, give it a share, give it a like, subscribe if you want more content like it, and I'll catch you on the flip side.